Be sure to look at the label on the can of spray in this cartoon. Well, it's a proper cartoon for the 2020 presidential election, I think. If anything else could go wrong, it will go wrong. We're just going to have to continue to pray and be patient that God's on his throne. He's going to eliminate any cheating, and he's going to act on his righteousness, not ours, not because we deserve it, but because he's righteous. In any case, we're in the book of Daniel, chapters 9, 10, 11, and 12 get a little complicated, and I want to look again at the prayer. Remember that Isaiah wrote around 740 to 680. Jeremiah wrote around 627 to 536, and Daniel, who we're looking at, wrote around 605 to 536. And it's very, very important when we think about the prayer. When we look at Habakkuk, for example, he was confused because of the hearts of the people of Israel and because of God's lack of action. And then he was even more confused when God said he was going to bring action. And then there was Jeremiah, who wept over the terrible situation of the people of Israel. And then there's Ezekiel, who warned the people of Israel. And then there's Daniel, whose heart is broken, and he confesses to God. He does an intercessory prayer, a beautiful prayer, a prayer that's comprised of at least three elements. And those elements were talked about yesterday. We talked about the fact that it was a serious prayer. He was fasting and he was in sackcloth. I wonder how many times our prayers are that serious. Second thing we saw was a sincere prayer, adoration and praise for God. And he certainly had many things that he was talking about. But one of the things that he mentioned very, very clearly was that he was counting on God's compassion for the people. In verses 19, he talks about the need for forgiveness. And it's a sovereign prayer because Daniel doesn't ask that this be done on behalf of the righteousness of the people or his righteousness, but he asks God to respond because the pagans were saying things about the God of Israel. He wasn't concerned about what they were saying about the people of Israel. Daniel was concerned about what they were saying about the God of Israel. Daniel's prayer was a righteous prayer. Many people say that it was a prayer that we probably ought to use as a model prayer, very similar to when Jesus was teaching his disciples how to pray. Nevertheless, we see this prayer. And what's so incredible about this prayer in chapter 9 is the fact that God answers before Daniel has even finished his prayer. Think about that for a minute. God answers before Daniel has even finished the prayer. It tells us that clearly in verse 20. It tells us that while he was still speaking, while he was still praying, God commanded Gabriel, an angel, to go and give Daniel a vision and to answer his prayer. Now, he not only deals with the short-term answer, but he also gives Daniel, because of Daniel's righteousness, because of Daniel's finding favor with God, he gives Daniel the privilege of seeing a timeline for the coming of the Messiah, the cutting off of the Messiah, the second coming of the Messiah, and the final death to sin. What a wonderful, wonderful thing Daniel was given the privilege of seeing. Now, he may not have understood it all. Nevertheless, he was given all of that information. It seems to me that God is speaking to me at least, and I hope he's speaking to you. And so I don't want to drive this into the ground, but I do think it's vitally important in light of the presidential election and everything hanging fire right now. In Isaiah 48:11, God says, I will act. And I believe God will act. But I think it's important for us to take this lesson from Daniel and apply it to our lives right now. You see, God's action may be punishment to us, that is, as a nation. He may defend his name and bring about an election of people that will stand for the sanctity of life, our social justice, and for the turning around of our country. Or maybe still just trying to get our attention, that we're not doing all that we should be doing, that we're not as vocal as we should be, that we're trying to be too politically correct instead of speaking out against sin. I don't know what God is trying to say, whether he's trying to say, I'm going to continue to punish you because of your actions, or whether he's saying, I'm going to defend my own name, or whether he's saying, I'm going to try to get your attention so that you'll be more vocal, you'll stand up for what's right. But please pray. Pray like Daniel. Pray personal confession as Daniel did. Pray intercessory confession as Daniel did. And pray that God would show you clearly what he's going to do and why he's going to do it. Let this be a turning point in our own lives, that we'll be more vocal about social injustice. We'll be more vocal about the sanctity of life, that we'll be more vocal about God's standards and values, that we'll not try to be so politically correct or be so afraid that we might step on somebody's toes or hurt somebody's feelings. I think there's a lot for us to learn from Daniel here. And before we look at the coming Messiah, when we recognize that we could never be good enough, that we could get into heaven by the law, and when we look at the glories of the fact that God has provided a redemption for our souls through the person of Jesus Christ, before we look at the fact that he will once and for all do away with sin, and that there will be a time of eternal rest and peace for all of us through Jesus Christ, I think we need to take a look at right now this whole presidential election, this whole state of our country, and that we examine ourselves, we confess our sins, we confess the sins of the nation, and that we ask God for forgiveness and pray that he'll take action now. But we'll have to be patient. God's on his throne. Not my will, not your will, but his will be done. I pray that he would clarify and make clear exactly what he wants us to do next. And that's my thought for the day. God bless you and have a great day.